Welcome to the Psychology World podcast. I'm Connor Whiteley, bringing you psychology news, articles, and other interesting psychology-related articles. You can find the podcast notes and more interesting psychology-related things, and you can get your free 8 psychology book box set at connorwhiteley.net. Now let's get on to the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 131 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on how social factors impact male suicide. And it is Friday the 28th of January 2021 as I record this. So we are returning back to the topic of suicide, which will be a major focus for 2022, along with dementia and careers in psychology. So this is an absolutely brilliant episode, and I really did enjoy writing about it, because not only do we get to look at how social factors impact male suicide, but then we also get to talk about what could be a new approach towards mental health treatment. This is really good, and I cannot recommend it enough. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest, and the first one is, people on the extreme left and right are more likely to believe in conspiracy theories. Belief in conspiracy theories has been linked to various factors, including low levels of critical thinking, a need to feel special, and even a yearning for excitement and thrills. And in all fairness, if you turn to conspiracies and actually believe in them, then your life's got to be a bit boring. But I do understand that. How does political ideology come into it? Some studies suggest that there is a straightforward association. In most people with more extreme right-wing views, more prone to conspiracy theories. But other work has found a U-shaped relationship where conspiratorial thinking, that's such a good word, is more common amongst people on the extremes of both the right and left compared to those with more moderate views. The latter findings has tend to come from research into small groups of relative prosperous nations. Note the authors of a new study in Nature of Human Behaviour. But now, looking at data for more than 100,000 people in 26 countries, the team finds further evidence that conspiracy theories are more common amongst the far left as well as the right, and provides some suggestions to why this might be. So there are two main things that I actually want to comment on about this article. So the first one is that conspiracy theories are actually quite interesting. That feeds into the yearning for excitement and thrills, though, because of course it is quite boring. I like to think of COVID, but what is much more exciting is that it was this Chinese plot. I think that's one of them. That or COVID is caused by the 5G network. Of course, it all sounds ridiculous, but it is a lot more interesting. Yeah, so that definitely feeds into it. But please, everyone, if you're that bored and you're looking for thrills and excitement, don't pick conspiracy theories. But the other thing that I want to mention is that I forget when, but I know on the psychology news section before, we've also looked at far left or authoritarianism, and people were trying to raise the alarm about it. So this just feeds into it. So both the far right and the far left are almost just as dangerous as each other. So it's really important that we focus on both of them. So the next one is, children's books still feature more male than female protagonists. Now this one I can't get into too much depth about, because, of course, as a writer and someone who knows the publishing industry very well, I know what's more likely the answer. But let's see what this article says. So there are many fields in which women are underrepresented. In certain areas of education and academia, in politics, and in senior leadership roles. Efforts have been made across sectors to improve this representation, as we've particularly covered in the case of STEM. Unequal representation may start before the workplace or university, however, even before school. Exploring children's literature, a newer study in PLOS, one from researchers at Princeton and Emory universities, find an overrepresentation of male protagonists in children's books, potentially reinforcing damaging societal expectations of those of all genders. And actually, I think I will comment on this, because the real reason behind this is that basically, when you pitch a publisher your book, where the amount of money that you get is based on the sales of previous books. And this is another reason why black authors get a lot less money than white authors, because black authors tend to write in a different particular style compared to white authors. So if you're the publisher, and your publishing house has a proven sales record of children's books with male protagonists, but then someone that comes at you with a female protagonist book, from their perspective, that's not necessarily what sells. And there are so many really weird, really ridiculous sales stuff when it comes to publishing houses. But yeah, and to be honest, it's absolutely rubbish. Basically, well, because of how publishing houses work and how ridiculous their decision making is, that's why books with more male protagonists tend to get published over female protagonists. Of course, there's a lot more to it, and how it is actually a lot more balanced than all the official figures make it out. But that's the sort of like gist of it, because if you look at the official figures, it always seems that even in adult fiction, like there's more male protagonists. But if you look at if you look like other fiction, then there always tends to be more female leads than the official numbers. For example, in all my fiction, I tend to think men are really, but like, I tend to think that men are really like disadvantaged, because in my own books, I always tend to have a female lead, for example. Yeah, but that's just something that you might find interesting. So the final one is, highlighting refugees' resilience can boost their confidence and engagement at a university. Refugees face all kinds of obstacles to settling well into a new country. One is the stigmatised identity of refugees. Weak, unskilled victims, write Christina Berg at the Free University of Berlin and her colleagues in a new paper in Psychological Science. So the team designed a simple intervention to reframe the identity as one characterised instead by perseverance and the ability to cope with adversity. When they tested it with refugees who were studying online, they found that it increased their engagement in their course, which in theory could make for greater future university and career success. And I cannot agree with this enough. I personally do not understand the refugee stereotype whatsoever, that refugees are weak, unskilled workers who would just come over to certain countries for their benefits. I've never understood that, because if you really dig into the numbers, it's always such the minority who actually come over for the benefit system here. Yeah, well, like here in the UK, for example, and there are other countries that do similar things. So that I've never understood though. So it's really good that we are starting to change these stereotypes and actually use it in helpful therapeutic settings. That's really good, and hopefully this will be the start of something. So I really enjoyed that psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to psychology news section. So I've just been continuing with my psychology placement, and they're doing tons of other things this week. So there's nothing great to report. But in 2 episodes' time, that I will have something for the psychology news update that I'll be able to talk about a bit more in depth, because I'll be going into the British Museum next week for their history in Peru exhibition. So I really am looking forward to it, because Peru is really interesting. And to be honest, my history generally is sort of quite good. But my South American history is, no, I really don't know that much about South America. So it'd be really good to actually explore it in a bit more depth. So as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment on the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi-whiteley. I always love to hear from all of you, because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Formulation in Psychotherapy. Now thank you all of you that have been buying it recently, because this has turned into a really, really popular book. So I'm really pleased about that. So formulation is a great area of clinical psychology, and in all honesty, it's where mental health should be heading at, because formulation is all about tailor-making the psychotherapy to the individual. So this is really important, and this is honestly one of my most favourite books, because it's just so relevant. It's still really important, and it's really interesting to see how all the different psychotherapy disciplines actually use formulation in their own unique way, though. So I cannot recommend this great, easy to understand book enough. And if you want to go on to do clinical psychology at master's or even doctoral level, then I really do recommend this book, because it will at least give you a good foundation to build upon your master's and everything else, though. So that is Formulation in Psychotherapy, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback, large print and hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore and local library if you request it. But if you enjoyed today's episode and you don't want to buy a book, then you can now give me a bit of like one-time support at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. So let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about how social factors impact male suicide. And after looking at male suicide as a whole in episode 22 of the podcast, where we learned about suicide rates, the general psychology behind the suicide and why it's increasing, we now need to investigate a new approach of treating and hopefully preventing male suicide. And this is a very eye-opening episode for all of us. So like all mental health conditions, male suicide is caused by a number of different interacting factors, but social factors will be the focus of this episode, simply because these are the factors that can be changed to create more user-friendly services for men, building upon what we spoke about in the last episode. Furthermore, the following groups are those that are most likely to be affected by male suicide: unemployed men, divorced men, Aboriginal men, military veterans, men with mental health conditions. And the reason why we're looking at all of these together is quite simple, because for a lesser or greater extent, all of these groups share the themes of social isolation, suspicion from wider society, financial restraint, amongst others. Not only does this all put an additional strain on their mental health, but all of these factors can sadly result in wider society giving them a lack of empathy for one reason or another. All meaning that these groups of men are less likely to get empathy and support that they need from wider society. Social alienation. So this is a particularly awful social factor for everyone, but even more so for these groups of men, due to when people experience a perceived or real rejection from society, then this can lead to a strong sense of social alienation, leading to a person feeling like they don't have a purpose or meaning in their life. And as we've spoken before on the podcast, both of these are primary reasons for staying alive. And if you take them away, then a person's mental health can seriously be damaged. If I'll use a practical example, in the most Western countries like the US, UK, France, etc., men tend to get meaning from their lives from two sources. And yes, I know I'm being really generic here, but it does show the point. Because men tend to get meaning and purpose from being in the workforce and being the centre or head of a family. Therefore, when a man loses his family in a divorce or loses his job and becomes unemployed, this can put massive strains on their mental health, as the men could believe that they don't have meaning or purpose in their lives anymore. Stereotypes into male suicides. Additionally, stereotypes that stigmatise individuals like Aboriginal men, men with mental health conditions and veterans, these can have even more damaging consequences, because these stereotypes lead to people not having as many opportunities for work or dating in the first place, so this leads them to not socially integrating and becoming marginalised, leading to social alienation again. And this is why I absolutely hate with a passion stereotypes, because most of them are so completely wrong, so they only do more damage for no fault of the sufferer. For example, the stupid myth about everyone with a mental health condition is dangerous, or that, or like one of my favourite, depressed people are just lazy. No, I don't know how people can even think that. But I guess that hopefully over time these myths, lies, which they basically are, and the stereotypes will get less and less powerful. But sometimes the myths are just funny because they're so wrong. So, what does this mean for prevention programs? Now we know the information, how do we apply it to the real world and hopefully try to save lives? If we're going to talk about a new or renewed approach to help prevent male suicide, then the programme would have to do at least three things. So firstly, just like the principles of formulation, we would have to tailor-make the therapy or support to the male in particular. Therefore, the man would get tailored support for their needs to make the transition them undergoing as easy as possible, like in a divorce or them becoming unemployed. Secondly, like I talk about in Abnormal Psychology 3rd edition, the psychotherapy or support would have to be adapted to become culturally appropriate, since that works best. And then you will check out the book for the studies that support that. For example, but you would have to adapt the therapy given to Aboriginal men differently to military veterans to make sure the therapy is as effective as possible. Finally, the overall mental health service, which, to be honest, I did sort of do this a bit like UK focus, like this paragraph, but to be honest, I cannot imagine it being like much different around the world. Finally, the overall mental health service, which is somewhat broken as it is due to budget cuts, the focus on the biomedical model and other factors, definitely has a role to play, since research shows that men prefer grassroots services and to local programs for their mental health. So where support should be developed services. And what some of these grassroots places include are spiritual or religious organisations, local peer-to-peer support groups like AA, GA, I don't know the other ones, and other non-profits, as well as these organisations are actually well placed to help with mental health, the feelings of social alienation, and the loss of meaning and purpose in life. Wrap up. After covering the basics of male suicide, I know that there is a lot that needs to change in the world before the silent crisis of male suicide can start to slow down and hopefully stop one a day. But I really hope by talking about it on the podcast, I can start to educate people about it, and to be honest, educate myself too about it, because none of us know this stuff, because no one talks about it. So that's what I'm trying to do with that minor focus on it this year. So in the coming podcast episodes, which I've already said is about like one a month, we'll start to look at the really interesting aspects of suicide and to cover aspects that I had no idea were even related to suicide. So there are some fascinating episodes that come in ahead. But please, if you, your friends, or anyone ever thinks about suicide, please seek professional help. And if you go to the blog post at connorwhiteley.net/podcast, and it's episode 131, there are some links at the bottom of the podcast. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and that you got something out of it. If you want to learn more, then please definitely check out episode 122 of the podcast and Formulation in Psychotherapy, because of that book really built upon what we spoke about today. And if you know anyone who would find today's episode useful, then please share it with them. I'm really grateful when you wonderful people help us spread the word about the podcast. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the show notes, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. And if you want a free 8-book psychology box set, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.